I think that turning point was when I had explored a lot of different things, I just didn't really see any fulfillment. I was like, there's no point to any of it. I wanted to look around and see what is making people happy, what is fulfilling them, who are the happiest people I know. And the first people I thought of were my grandparents. I attribute that to her faith. My first exposure to Catholicism, there were two sisters that really kind of brought me to the faith. I remember we were on the bus ride up, and Emily was reading a book. I can't even remember what it was, but it was a religious book, and I asked her about it. So I was like, oh, what are you reading? And she tells me, and it's just like, oh, he's gonna make fun of me, isn't he? And I was telling them that I was going around to different churches, just trying to see what Christianity was about and how different people were looking at it and see what was going to fit for me. I eventually go. It was such a different atmosphere. I instantly recognized that there was something remarkably different. I just realized that there was a lot of meat there. I couldn't just devour it in a few weeks or a few months and then be like, okay, well, I'm done with this. I'm going to move on. It had so much depth and so much meaning that I don't think it would be possible to ever exhaust the endless beauty of the faith.
Cheers, man. You ready to start?
Yeah, let's start.
Cool, yeah.
Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Pretty good beer.
Yeah, it is.
Dirty hippie.
Dirty hippie.
Yeah, that's what I used to look like with my long hair, so
yeah, it's
kind of my brand.
It's a great thing you shave. I can't tell you how many people told me, oh, I'm so happy all those young men shaved their heads. At least trimmed them up.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, it was starting to look bad. It actually looks worse, like in between super long or like in between like short and long.
Sure.
That's when it's the worst, but you can wear hats. But then at some point you just start to look kind of gross with the long hair. I was like seeing pictures and just going, so had to finally get rid of the super liberal disguise.
Right.
That's what it was.
That's what it was.
Well, dude, it's good to have you on the show. I feel like I've never fully heard this story, but I've heard like bits and pieces from you and from other people. So I'm excited to actually hear it and get the full conversion story of Garhardt. I guess just to start all the way at the beginning, tell us about your background growing up. What kind of, did you have a faith upbringing? What was that like? Just kind of all that stuff.
Yeah. So I'd say I didn't really grow up with a whole lot of influences in the faith. I had religious grandparents, so I would go to church with them occasionally, but it was definitely not a routine thing. And neither of my parents really had any religious affiliation. So I didn't have a whole lot of influence growing up. I think I pretty quickly became just an atheist once I got into middle school, high school time. And I didn't really start thinking about it until my junior year of high school was probably the time when it really started. I was dating a Mormon when I was in high school, my freshman and sophomore year, and that was interesting. I think her goal was like she would want me to convert to Mormonism.
Mm-hmm. So was she taking you to church and stuff?
No, actually, I didn't go. I don't know how hard she was trying to press it, but either way, I didn't really go with her. And after we broke up, I actually started being like, well, maybe that Mormonism thing has got something going for it. So I started exploring more. And so that was, I think, around that time frame. I think dating her was my first introduction to like a family that had faith and generally seemed like they were trying to live an upright life. And so it definitely made me curious, like, well, how am I living my life? What am I doing? And starting to question that, I realized that I wasn't really that happy. And I didn't have any aspirations or long-term goals. And I didn't really see how I was improving as a person. So I think not having faith or not having something that is greater than myself led me to, just be very slothful, idle. I was one of those kids that just stayed inside, played video games all the time, neglected my schoolwork, Just
pretty relatable, like young high school boy type of thing, but for sure.
Sure.
I'm just going to move your mic so it's not in that camera.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And tilt it in like that.
Sure.
There we go.
How's that sound?
That sounds good, and then we can see your face, so that's good too.
Oh yeah.
So you were kind of noticing. You said that life didn't like have the meaning. It wasn't going anywhere. What were you getting your meaning from at that point? Like, what was it you would do to feel fulfilled, or like what were you trying?
I think the main thing was like exercise, working out. Like that kind of gave me a sense of achievement. So that was something I was exploring. But then I don't think I had much of a drive to really pursue it wholeheartedly. So it was something that, okay, it had some sort of meaning to me, but it really didn't like fulfill me.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that turning point was when I had explored a lot of different things, and I just didn't really see any fulfillment. I was like, there's no point to any of it.
Mm-hmm.
Where is this going to go from here? What is this going to do for me in the long run? And it just seemed all so pointless, empty. And so I wanted to look around and see what is making people happy, what is fulfilling them, who are the happiest people I know. And the first people I thought of were my grandparents. Not really a whole lot of influence there, but at the very least, when I'm around my grandmother, especially, she's just got this deep-seated joy that I hadn't seen from anyone else,
mm-hmm.
and I attribute that to her faith. So that was probably the first influence that made me realize, okay, this is an option. This might be something that's fulfilling. So let's just explore it a little bit.
So you think at that point it wasn't necessarily even like an intellectual or philosophical thing. It was just like looking for something to kind of fill the hole, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
I feel like that's kind of what it was. It was like, well, there's got to be some sort of meaning or some sort of point to all this. So let's just explore it. I don't think there was a whole lot of deep intellectual thought with that, but
you started with Mormonism, kind of? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
So
okay. I think that was the first starting point. Yeah. Just because I had a Mormon girlfriend, and so I had some exposure to the faith, and it seemed like for the most part, they're pretty devout. I think they don't. I don't know. You see Mormons as more of goody two shoes, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
In my mind, it was like, okay, so they're more radical in their beliefs. They're trying to separate themselves from a lot of what happens in today's culture. So that would probably be a good place to start. Like, let's see if they are truly happy, and they're separating themselves from all these things. That might be the way to go. So
how'd that work out?
Well, I'm Catholic, so
yeah.
But either way, I started going to a few of their services, and I was chatting with the missionaries a lot, and it just, I got weird feelings from it. It didn't feel like it was the way to go, but I care about like history. I always enjoyed history in class, and so I wanted to look into the history of the church. I think that would probably be a good place to look and just see where's the progression of their faith. Where did it start at?
Right.
And where it is now. And I just noticed that it seemed like it was constantly changing. It didn't seem like there was anything set in stone in the faith. Just their hierarchy, the prophet being at the very top, having the ability to change doctrine pretty much is what it seemed like.
Yeah, kind of just whenever he wants, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It's at his discretion. So that seemed like there wasn't much of a basis or like a root to the faith that I could latch onto and say, okay, well, this is how it was from the beginning to what it is now.
Right.
And so clearly they have some level of truth to it.
Did they have responses to those? Like, did you ask the missionaries those types of questions about like some of the historical idiosyncrasies and stuff?
Yeah, and I would ask them that, and they would say just the more we learn, the better we get. The more we know,
that's like almost doctrinal development, but different, right? Because
right.
It's not like this is genuinely developing in kind from where it starts. It's just we found out we were wrong, so we changed it. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So yeah, I guess it was like, well, there's no. Yeah, if you guys don't have a fundamental truth that you guys can look for, then how did it just
not much security there, like, because it could change tomorrow, right? Like,
right. If I might be a good Mormon yesterday, but today I'm not because of this change. So that seemed really strange to me. And at this point, I was going to both the Mormon church and I was going to a few different Protestant services. I had a friend that was Protestant, and he would take me to church with him. And that was kind of the first exposure to like a Bible study I had. Now we were going to a Bible study, I think we were going through the book of John, or the Gospel of John. And so that was my first, I guess, format of like discussion about the gospel, discussion about scripture. And I really enjoyed that. And that was definitely one of those places where I could have a lot of my questions answered and learn more about the faith and about scripture. And I would try and chat with the missionaries about that. And like, not only that, just like progression from start to finish, like why is there stuff that's changing? It seems like it's pretty clear that like truth is not relative. This if it is the true faith, then there needs to be a certain level that is unchanging. And it almost seemed like every time I tried to talk to them about that, they wanted to switch topics or talk about something else.
This was the same experience I had. We had some missionaries come visit and talk for like 2 hours just upstairs. And I tried to bring it up in relation to like the doctrine of like becoming gods. And I was like, doesn't that just at some point become an eternal regression? And they're like, so what? And I was like, well, like, should I worship a human being? And they're like, well, no, that'd be idolatry. And I was like, but a human being can become God.
Right. So if you just keep taking it back, it doesn't follow.
And they said to me, they're like, well, I was like, what about the God who created, like God, the God of the Bible, you say could have been a human once? And they're like, yeah. And I was like, well, what about his God? Should we worship his God? And they're like, well, at some point it just is irrelevant. I'm like, how could it be irrelevant if it's divinity? And the guy was just like, got a little flustered, and then wanted to move on.
Right.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And so I started looking around some more. I was just kind of church hopping, like, okay, well, let's just see what they're all about. I want to get to the bottom of this. I didn't necessarily find any issues with a lot of the Protestant services I went to. It seemed like, we're worshiping God. But I just wanted to see, okay, what's gonna fit me best. I didn't really think there wasn't much. I guess there wasn't much depth to it. It was more or less just let's find something
kind of like
that's
what
the
works
best
for
fit.
me.
Right. Yeah. And so,
what was your impression of like? Did you probably went to some more modern evangelical worship services and stuff that didn't really have a particular impression of any kind?
No, not really. I mean, it felt shallow in a way. I think I was looking for that depth. I didn't really like possess any of it, but I could recognize that like there needs to be more than just singing some songs and getting this emotional response, and then you go about your week, and it's like I see these people throughout the week or something, and it's like, does this change you at all? Did this move you? Is this how you're living your life day in, day out? And I didn't really see that. So it felt like it was just really shallow. It's like I don't want to go to a concert. I want to learn about the faith. Right.
If you wanted a concert, you could do that without like the moral obligations imposed,
Right.
But
so at this point, I was involved in Special Olympics in high school. I was helping out with that. I really enjoyed that. I think at this point I was starting to realize that like we like a certain level of moral responsibility and a respect for life, and I was really trying to just become a better person in general, and so I saw that as a great outlet. Like I do want to be a productive member of society and of my community, and I want to help others who oftentimes are belittled or just thought of as lower. And so I think that's also really why I'm in the medical field now. It's kind of just that is I've carried that with me, is just I want to be of assistance to people. I don't want to do like a fake job,
Right. Well, right. That's I was gonna say that's real, like actual valuable assistance, because you're doing like you're saving lives, or you're helping people who aren't able-bodied or whatever it is, as opposed to like customer service, like, oh, I help people. It's like, you just kind of it's different versus like real utility and difficult. I mean, like you have long shifts and Yeah, that's crazy. All right, so you're helping people at Special Olympics. You're kind of realizing, in a sense, it almost sounds like you have this awareness of like the natural moral law, but maybe you haven't put words to it yet. And then how's that developed? Like, what kind of leads you, I guess, from vaguely exploring religion and just kind of seeing what fits and like having this awareness of the moral law to like Catholicism?
So I think really where that started, it was my first exposure to Catholicism. In Special Olympics, there were two sisters that really kind of brought me to the faith. That was the Hartman sisters, Emily and Sarah. So they were Catholic, and I didn't know what Catholicism really was. I had heard a little bit about it, and so I mean, I didn't really understand the concept of the church. And so we were at like a track meet up in Grand Junction, where it's hosted at CMU for the Western Slope, and I was just chatting with them because it was pretty much just the three of us who were taking care of all the kids, and we just started talking, and I legitimately was curious about the faith, but up until this point, they had seen me as, this really modern, just morally corrupt individual, and they hadn't really known that I was starting to get interested in the faith. And I remember we were on the bus ride up, and Emily was reading a book. I can't even remember what it was, but it was a religious book, and I asked her about it, and she thought I was kind of like gonna make fun of her for reading the book.
Why are you asking?
Right. So I was like, oh, what are you reading? And she tells me, and it's just like, oh, he's gonna make fun of me, isn't he? But I was like legitimately curious, because I was like, okay, so I guess I didn't really realize that you had a developed faith. I haven't really got to know you, and so I was curious. And so I don't think we didn't really spark much conversation, because I think she was quickly trying to shut it down, like, oh, he's just gonna belittle me or something. But over the course of that track meet, it was a 2-day event. We started chatting a little bit more, and I was telling them that I was going around to different churches, just trying to see what Christianity was about and how different people were looking at it, and see what was going to fit for me. And I had mentioned, oh, there's this church over on Niagara. It's that big white one. I don't know what they're about, but I don't know. Looks cool. I guess I'll go check it out. And they're looking at each other like, yeah, you should go do that.
Go to that one. Yeah. Why are you wasting your time at the other ones?
Right. So they were like, yeah, you should go there. And I kind of got the idea that they were like, they knew something I didn't. I was like, oh, is that where you guys go? And they're like, yeah, it is. And so I eventually go, and at this point I find out that my great aunt is Catholic, my grandmother's sister. And you found out like because you went and you saw her? Well, no, I told my grandmother I was going to go to this church. I was like, I'm going to go check this out. So I'm going to go see what it's about. And she says, well, your aunt is Catholic. And I was like, I didn't know that. I didn't at all. So she said, well, I'll go with you, and we can go with your aunt. And so the three of us went, and completely different atmosphere. I mean, you walk in and it's, for the most part, really quiet. It's completely different from you walk into these Protestant churches, and before it starts, it is just an absolute zoo. Everyone's drinking coffee and chatting. They're having their morning pastries, and it's a madhouse. And so I walk in, and it's like, this is really quiet. Like no one's talking. Everyone's on their knees. Like, what are you doing? Why are you on your knees? Just praying. And it was such a different atmosphere. I instantly recognized that there was something remarkably different. At this point, I hadn't attended any like liturgical churches. I hadn't been to any like Episcopalian or Anglican churches at this point. So this was completely new for me, just different entirely. And so we get into the pew, and we sit down, and Mass starts, and I didn't realize that there was like, there's this call and response type deal, and it was just so,
it feels weird at first.
Foreign, right?
Yeah.
And it made me really nervous. Like I was like sweating, and my heart was racing.
Like, is this a cult? What is this?
Yeah, I was like, what is going on? This is strange. And so after that, I tried chatting with my grandmother and my aunt about it, and we were just, just basic conversation. And it started to spark my curiosity. I was like, there's something more to this. Like, there is a clear reverence that I have not found anywhere else. So I go home and I start researching it. Sorry.
You're good.
It's the carbonated beverage.
Yeah, that's the only thing about beer and podcasts is like you're going to burp a little bit. That's fine though.
So I go home and I start researching, like, okay, well, what is Catholicism? What's separating it? What makes it different? And this was a really big turning point, because the stuff that I learned just really stuck with me. It was like, okay, this seems, it was almost just like this innate feeling that this was right, like this was true. And so at this point I'm still talking with the missionaries. I'm still going to those other churches, trying to organize the times in which I'm going. I end up being like at church for 6 hours every Sunday, just trying to find the one. And, I start chatting with the missionaries and saying, well, the Catholics believe this about, X, Y, and Z. And I noticed that every time I brought that up, they just really got uncomfortable. They didn't really want to chat about any of that. And that's where I really started to see that, like, avoidance, like, oh, we'll just move on to something else. Like, I think the big one was the Eucharist. I was trying to find, well, okay, what is so fundamentally different about Catholics than others, aside from like the liturgy?
Right.
And the biggest thing I could find was the Eucharist. And that was another one of those things where I wasn't coming with a different perception of what it was. I didn't know what it was at all. Mm-hmm. So
what was your gut reaction to that teaching, though?
It was
from
like
completely secular, not really that religious, to this piece of bread becomes Jesus. Like, what was your initial impression of that?
My initial impression was, how could anyone else think of it any other way?
Really?
Yeah. I didn't have a Bible at the time, but I was, I would read a little online Bible, on one of those apps, and they were like, going through John chapter 6, and I'm just reading it, and I'm like, there's what else could he have meant?
Right. It's pretty,
it seems
very,
pretty
verily I
clear-cut.
say to you, this is my flesh. Yeah.
Yeah. So going through the scripture regarding the Eucharist, and then also starting to see those ties to the Old Testament and this carryover of the new Passover, it made me really think, like, no, there's no other way you can interpret this. And so talking with the missionaries about that, they didn't really have much to say. They were just kind of like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I guess that's what they think. And then move on. Let's keep
Anyways,
going.
Yeah. Here's the book of Nephi or whatever. Yeah.
Right.
At this time, were you talking to evangelicals at all? I mean, you were still going to some of those churches and stuff, but you're kind of having this, you're looking into Catholicism deeply and finding value there, but you're discussing with the Mormon missionaries and not getting good feedback there. Did you have any sort of evangelical reaction to this?
No, I really didn't, actually. I didn't get exposed to too much of that. I mean, I had heard of it, and it's pop culture, and movies, or you see kind of like what that is, what that looks like, but I never really had much exposure to it. And I think just from where I was at that point, like, these other Protestant services seem really shallow. Like, that almost seems more so. It was like, it's like, you're being moved by the Spirit. Like, I don't know. Are you really? I don't know.
I just want to dance. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. It was just kind of like, this doesn't really seem like worship. So I didn't really have much exposure to it. I didn't delve down into that at all. And so let's see, where am I? Yeah. So I'm talking to the missionaries again about all these new things I'm learning. And I'm like, this seems like it's true. Like, why would he have meant it any other way? So the Eucharist was one of those really big sticking points. And then now that I'm learning about Catholicism, this whole idea of like a continuation of faith from start to finish, unchanging, I'm realizing, okay, the Catholic Church possesses that. There's something fundamentally different about their doctrine that no other church has. It seems like these other ones are changing with the times, and even when it seems like it's going to get the church in trouble, they're not changing. Why is that?
Right.
So that was very important for me, is like, okay, well, there needs to be a semblance of truth that we can follow. And I was starting to see that, well, Catholicism is holding on to that, and it doesn't seem like anyone else is. And I didn't have any exposure to the Orthodox Church, so I think like the only other faith I think that could claim to have that continuation or even that like apostolic succession would, you know, be the Orthodox Church.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't really have any exposure to that, or else I think that would have probably been a really big mix up for me, being like, okay, well, which way do I go? You know, who's right? Who's the schismatic here? So
did you look into any like non-Christian religions at all at this point? I mean, all of your explorations have been either historically Christian or like Christian adjacent, like Mormonism.
Mm-hmm.
But did you look into like Islam or Hinduism or Buddhism?
I never really looked into Islam or...
That's probably good.
Yeah, no. I think probably just being an American, I had kind of already negative connotation looking at Islam, so I didn't really think of even exploring it in any way. But I would say, you know, I say I wasn't raised religiously, but I think my mother definitely subscribes to more like New Age practices. She's a massage therapist. I think that stuff is kind of naturally ingrained in it, you know, this like recognition of chakras and all that. So I didn't really have much exposure to religion, but when I was really like, I guess, I don't know, I feel like I was 12 or something, 12, 13, I definitely asked my mom, like, well, what is all this stuff about? Like, what is it? And she gave me like little books, like little pamphlets, like, okay, well, you know, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, what is it? Like all those different Eastern religions. And I enjoyed the idea of like meditation and trying to quiet the mind, but those weren't things that I had like really carried with me. It was just kind of like, oh, this seems like make believe. I don't really know what to make of it. So
all right, so from there, like, so you're exploring Catholicism, you're kind of becoming jaded with the Mormon missionaries, and they don't really have good answers, or they're avoidant in some of the stuff you're seeing this continuity in the Catholic faith. What kind of is the next step? I mean, you know, so are you starting to go to mass regularly? Are you meeting people? And then what leads to, you know, inevitably coming into the church?
Yeah, so I started going to mass regularly. At this point, I wasn't really going with my grandmother or aunt. I was just going by myself. And so even though it was like such a weird and uncomfortable thing, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know customs or norms, and I felt like I was completely out of place. I just kept going. I just felt like I had to. I needed to give this some weight and give it some thought and try it. So I kept attending mass regularly, and I soon realized that I think I need to come every Sunday. Like this is different from anything else I've explored. And so I pretty quickly, I'd say only maybe 3 or 4 weeks into exploring Catholicism and going to mass, I pretty quickly cut out a lot of the other churches I was going to, especially the Mormons. I mean, they continued to try and contact me, and I was just kind of like, you know, I think I'm.
It's not me. It's you.
I'm doing okay. Yeah, it's not me. It's definitely you.
It's definitely you.
So I realized pretty quickly, like, this is where I need to be, and I need to explore this more. And so I started going to mass regularly, and then the only people that I knew were Catholic were Emily and Sarah. And so I was like, you know, I need to talk to someone else in person about this. I need to start like having some influences in my life and someone who can teach me. And so I built up the courage, and after mass, I went up to one of them and just said, hey, I really want to learn more about Catholicism. I don't really know where to start fully, and I just want to get to know some Catholic people. So I came up to them, and you know, I started hanging out with them more. And this is one of those moments where it really started to click in my head. They took me out to coffee, and I think they were, you know, we're just gonna have a quick conversation. It'll be like, you know, maybe an hour. And, you know, next thing you know, it's been like 3 hours, and we've just been talking about.
Oh, that's the best.
Oh, it was amazing. It was really great. But they've told me that they were going into that conversation being like, okay, how are we gonna like explain the Eucharist to him? And at this point, they didn't know that like I had realized like, oh yeah, there's no way it can be anything else. Like
yeah, you're like
at this
already
point,
on board. It sounds like.
yeah, I was like, okay, this is true. I didn't have any bias. Like I wasn't coming from being a Protestant and being like, well, you're gonna have to really prove this to me. It was kind of like, well, who seems to have it right? And it seemed like it was a Catholic, so I instantly was like, well, if everything else seems to be lining up, then why would this be any different? And so, you know, I can see they're starting to build up the courage to say it, and they're like, okay, so what do you think about like communion? Like, what do you think about the Eucharist? And I was like, oh yeah, makes sense. seems right. Like I don't see it how
this is like the
that's
easiest,
any other way.
if you're like thinking of evangelism as sales,
Sure,
this is like
yeah.
the easiest sale to close. You've like already bought the product in your mind, and they're like, wait, then why are you talking to us? So what do you need to know?
Right. Yeah. So they were just kind of like, wait, you there's no conflict there? Like this is fine? And I was like, yeah.
Seems pretty neat. Yeah.
Seems pretty cool. I don't see anything wrong with it. It
Nice.
seems right. And they always bring this up where I was like, but what about relics? Like, what's the deal? Why do you want to put people's blood in vials and keep their bones? It's kind of weird.
It's pretty metal.
You know, so
Yeah.
they were just kind of like, that's the why did you not have any issue with the Eucharist? But you're like, what's up with this relic business?
Yeah, like this bread becoming like the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus. That's fine. Relics, a little goofy. It is kind of weird though. Like it's like from the outside, it's strange for sure.
Sure. Yeah, but once you get that exposure to, I guess like evidence for it in the Old Testament, especially, it's like, oh, this makes perfect sense. This is great. Relics are wonderful. So
for sure.
Yeah, so we have that conversation, and I think they were like, oh, okay, this is going to be easier than we thought.
Yeah, they're like, easy mode.
And so now it's like they're just waiting for me to make the decision to become baptized and confirmed, because at this point I hadn't been baptized I didn't get baptized when as a child or going to the Protestant church with my grandmother. She always had been like, well, you want to get baptized? And it was always like, what's the point? Like, no, I don't really care.
Was she in the church where it was kind of like you needed to make it like a decision, or were they baptizing infants, or?
They were baptizing you when you were older. I mean, 12, 13 type deal. Yeah, so you're making the choice to be baptized. But yeah, I didn't really have much desire to do that, and so at this point, I hadn't received anything like that, and I can't remember how long it was between that conversation and then deciding like, okay, I need to, if this is the way I want to go, I need to actually explore like entry into the church. And so,
so I was gonna say, what year was this? Like around what year did you come into the church?
So I got 3 for 1 in 2020.
Okay.
And that was COVID year, so the church got shut down. I didn't get to do it at Easter Mass. I had to wait till August 2nd, actually, of 2020. So, I think the confirmation classes were starting in 2019.
Did you have to do like the full? Sorry, that's the part you were getting to too, and then I kind of jumped you ahead.
No,
but
did
you do like the full like 9-month class and all that?
Yeah. So it was a 9-month class, and it was kind of interesting because I was trying to like figure out, okay, well, what do I need to do? And they're like, oh, just do the confirmation class. You just need to do this 1 year. Like normally it's a 2-year process, and they're like, you can just go to the year 2 class, and then at the end we'll you'll get baptized, confirmed, and receive Holy Communion. First Communion. And I was like, what? All I have to do is go to this class, and then you're gonna just put me right through? And they were kind of like, oh, well, you'll do a baptism class and a First Communion class. And
when's that? Yeah.
I was like, okay. When? And it never happened, never got scheduled.
Wow.
And I made the decision myself, like I need to go to both of these confirmation classes, because it's like I'm missing out on the whole first half. Like there has to be, why would you put it into 2 classes if you didn't want the first and the second? Is one not really that important? So I ended up going to both of them simultaneously because they were teaching them both. It was like you would go to a class every other week.
And they're probably like, who is this guy?
Yeah, so I was like, oh, no, I got to go to both. So yeah, I was going to both. And really I felt like most of my formation was coming from my friendship with Sarah and Emily at this point. I didn't have a whole bunch of formation through that preparation for the sacraments. But yeah, so COVID hits, and
Throws a wrench in everything.
right. I mean, that was just like, oh my goodness, this is making life so much harder. So I'm not getting to go to Sunday Mass. I really felt like isolated. I was still getting to go on walks with Emily and Sarah. You know, we'd go down to the park and go on walks and chat, and I'd go over to their house occasionally, and have dinner with them and their parents, Jay and Trisha. So that was a very formative experience for me, talking to them. But even then, it was like I felt really isolated, because now I'm not getting to go to church. I'm not really getting a whole lot. So I really had to like buckle down and commit to doing this. I think I could have easily, if I didn't think that this was important, just that would have been a turning point, and I would have probably fallen away.
Right.
And so Mass eventually starts back up, and you know they're preparing me to receive the sacraments, and I get baptized, confirmed, and receive First Communion on August 2nd, which I can't remember what that feast day is. I don't know what it is. I know it's one where I think it has something to do with, is it St. Francis of de Sales? No.
Someone in the comments will know.
Yeah, someone will know. Either way. Yeah, so at this point, I believe this was when that first pilot group for Lyft was starting up.
Oh, Shelly.
Shelly Paust was running.
Shout out to Shelly.
Yeah, so we started that group, and we were doing a series on the Mass and the Eucharist, I believe, is what it was. And so that was good, because it was like, okay, I know what the Eucharist is, and I'm like, oh yeah, no, I believe this. But I didn't really have a whole lot of context for it, and so that was really, really awesome to start getting more formation of like, okay, what is the Mass? What is this? What is the sacrifice? And just some more critical carryover from the Old Testament to the New Testament for the Eucharist, and that was really beautiful. I'm really appreciative of that group, and the people.
It's a pretty legendary group. I hear lots of stories from that core Lyft group and stuff. So
yeah,
some good people in there too.
Yeah, one of the members I was in a men's group with just recently. We disbanded, trying to get it back together though.
Shout out to Brooks.
Yeah, it was
we
Brooks.
know he'll be watching. One of my only local supporters actually.
Oh, nice. Yeah,
what a cool dude.
Yeah, so Brooks was in that original core group, and you know, we've been altar servers now together. We're starting to get into that and
good job at the procession, by the way.
Oh,
you guys looked, that was really good.
Thank you.
Really reverent and beautiful.
Yeah.
The traditional vestments and everything. I like it.
Yeah.
It's good.
No, so yeah, the cassock and surplice, it's nice. So yeah, definitely trying to get some more traditional I guess aspects back into to altar serving, just to show that reverence. You know, I think you know, we're up there with Father and the deacons. It's really important for us to look like we're reverent and know what we're doing, and really be committed to it. You know, I think not many of the kids actually want to do it, but I think part of that is, you know, it starts to, as it gets washed out and becomes less of what it was originally, there's not as much drive to do it, because it's not special anymore.
Right. There's not as much pomp, but there should be.
Right. Yeah.
Like the circumstance is deserving of that.
Right. Just
that pomp
decorum.
and circumstance and decorum. Yeah. Like that's a good place for it. Yeah. No, I totally agree. It always makes me laugh, because like knowing what I know about church history, like when I see you and Brooks up there, I'm like, oh, this is like normative, right? Like two guys taking it very seriously, at least two guys taking it very seriously, if not like we said, like 25 with the lamps and everything. But it's always funny, because I feel like every time one of you serves, I always see someone or hear someone that's like, oh, that must be a seminarian or something, which is just kind of funny. That's like anytime they see someone older, like now the assumption is that, oh, that must be someone that's in seminary formation.
Sure.
Which, I mean, for Brooks, that still could happen. But
it very well could.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No pressure, buddy. That's cool. Every time I see you guys up there, I'm tempted. I'm like, oh, I should buy my stuff. And try it out.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really great thing. I think it's very inspirational to some of the younger gentlemen, and showing them that there's a lot of value in doing this. It teaches discipline, patience, almost in like a military fashion. I mean, that's really, I feel like the liturgy kind of instills that in young men, and altar serving is a wonderful place to learn that reverence and discipline. So yeah, I'd love to see more young men be inspired by us. I think that was one of the big things of wanting to take it over and start training them, is that young men are gonna see this and be like, oh, this is cool. Like this has a lot of value, and it's very important. And I think that'll, in a large way, I think that will aid in proper discernment towards vocation, actually considering the priesthood more. I think that's like the perfect environment for young men to do that.
Totally. No, I agree completely. And I think too, and your whole story actually kind of speaks to this, I kind of want to talk about it. Young men want to take something seriously. Like they want to have something to do well, to take seriously, to give them purpose, to give them drive and discipline. And I mean, I think that's exemplified in your whole journey. I mean, I think a lot of people listening to this will probably be shocked that it's like, wait, you were going 6 hours at church, you were doing this research. By the time you had some of your first conversations on the ground, you were already probably more learned about Catholicism than some cradle Catholics, but that drive, I think, I mean, do you think that's something that's common to your generation? I mean, there's something happening. You're technically Gen Z, right?
I think so.
Yeah. I think there's something with Gen Z about that, and I'd love to hear your perspective on it, because it seems like, I mean, for someone to not just be like, oh, maybe I'll try church out kind of passively, and then it works for a little bit, and then you take a break or whatever. But no, you dove all the way in. I mean, took it very seriously. You wanted to know which one was right. You were diligent. Where's that coming from? I mean, is that just Gerhardt, or is that like generational, or is that just because that's how desperate the search for meaning was? Like, what do you think it was that was driving that intensity?
I don't know. I think it may be a combination of factors. I don't know if that I can really speak to my generation as much. I don't know. I don't know many of my classmates. I don't know where they're at or that drive that they had. So, I think for myself personally, I do have that personality where I grab something and I latch onto it and I just like absolutely try and exhaust it. But I can very quickly just get bored of it or tired of it and then just throw it on for the next thing. And I feel like that's what I did with Catholicism. Was I just latched on and was like, okay, I'm just going to dive into the deep end here. And I just realized that there was a lot of meat there. I couldn't just devour it in a few weeks or a few months and then be like, okay, well, I'm done with this. I'm going to move on. It had so much depth and so much meaning that, I don't think it would be possible to ever exhaust the endless beauty of the faith. I mean, there's just so much, and you might feel like, okay, well, I've learned everything. And then you go back and it's like, oh, okay, well, there's about 5 other ways I could interpret this scripture passage. There's so much more meaning to it, so
ever ancient, ever new.
Right. Yeah. So I think that was part of it. Is I like to just grab onto something, exhaust it, and then move on. But this was one of those things that I latched onto, and I don't think I'll ever exhaust it. So
yeah. Well, that's a good marker that it's the right one, right? Like if you can get to the end of understanding God and the covenant that he's revealed to man, then that says something about what you think God is like and what that covenant's like, right? But if we're talking about the infinite ground of all being, like that's, it should be deep like that. And that makes sense. It should be, all at once, something that's personable that we can connect to, which is like the heart of the incarnation. And at the same time, beyond all knowing, because God is infinite and his ways are higher and all that. I think I see a pattern, and just I'm curious to your thoughts on this. Like all the people, it's not that there's necessarily a movement of like droves of young people coming back into the church. Obviously, we know that's usually going the other way. Most young people that grow up Catholic at least leave. It's like 93%. It's tragic. I mean, if you lost 93% of your blood, you're dead, right?
Yeah.
Well, before that, it's probably much lower. It's probably like 30% or like 40%.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, your ability to compensate is like after, I think it's 20% blood loss, your compensatory mechanisms aren't going to bring you back.
Right. So but we're losing 93% of young people. But I feel like the young people who are coming into the church are, I mean, just even anecdotally, like looking at our parish, like all of the young couples, all the young singles, they're all very, very serious, you know, and it's not merely like, oh, I have, you know, Irish Catholic heritage, so it's kind of a family thing, or it's like I remember going to Christmas Mass growing up, so it's kind of like a sentimentality thing. It's like it's either real or I don't care, and if it's real, I want all of it. I want it exactly how it should be. I want what God wants for the church. I want what the church wants for the church, not what, you know, maybe a music director in the 70s wants for the church or whatever, you know.
Sure.
I think there's like this intensity with young converts that's refreshing to me, maybe because I am one of them, but maybe intimidating to everyone else. Is like, oh, what's coming? But I think, like, I have to think that some of that's because of where culture is at, right? Like, part of your story was like, what's the point of all of it, right? Do you think that, I mean, maybe most of Gen Z isn't doing that, but are you seeing, like, I guess among peers maybe not, but like, what do you think about that?
I think maybe where that drive is coming from, or that desire to learn the faith intimately and deeply, and not just shying away from those hard truths, might be rooted in the fact that most people aren't finding meaning in life. I think even if you go back 100 years, like, there wasn't many distractions. It was, you know, you have to work hard to live, you know, you're working to live. And at this point, it seems like it's not too hard to get by, and really you're working to distract yourself or to fuel those distractions. So I think people's identity has kind of been pulled away in different directions, and they're not really finding their identity where they should be. They're not finding it in their faith, and it's, or even really in their work in a way, you know, like work isn't gratifying. Like, I mean, like we mentioned at the beginning, it seems like there's a lot of fake jobs, you know. I wanted to do something that was real. Well, I mean, how do you find meaning in some of these really silly things where it's like it seems like you have a meeting and you're planning to plan something, and it's just strange, you know. I don't see how you could find much fulfillment in that. And so I think probably what a large part of it is people are like, they're realizing that they're not going to get anywhere with the jobs they're working. They're not going to, like, it's not making them a better person overall. So I think there is that natural drive to improve. We always want to be improving, but pretty much everything that we do now doesn't really push us towards that. It doesn't help us realize that there's a deeper meaning to life. It's all very surface level, and just is going to fade away. It's nothing but vapor. You know?
Yeah, Ecclesiastes. Well, I think that's interesting too, right? Because like the whole battle cry of like progressivism is like we're improving, right? And like maybe technology is like improving, but really it's like, okay, it's like more feature rich or it's faster, but that's like the extent of like the so-called improvement, right? Is that like, oh, well, our iPhones are 80% faster because of this new chip, and we're not maybe thinking about, okay, I mean, I think about this a lot, like the so-called time-saving devices that we invented, and now like all of our time is spent managing the time-saving devices.
Sure.
You know, it's just like this. It's this weird thing. So like, the improvement of like progressive liberalism is merely supposed circumstantial improvement, and yet like we're only allowed to look at the positive sides of that, and no one's having the conversations about like, okay, well, I can call you from anywhere with my iPhone, but it's also created an intense dopamine addiction and thrust pornography into every household with unlimited, unfettered, unregulated access for anyone of any age, and it's increased sex trafficking, right? So there's all those things where it's like, yeah, we've progressed, but like actually we've almost become more debased in our desires. We're seeing the breakdown of long-standing social institutions, divorces at an all-time high, epidemic of depression and suicide among young people. And like young people aren't even being immoral, like they're not even having sex, but that's just because they're not even hanging out, right? Like, which is it's weird because you're like, oh well, they're not being promiscuous. It's like, yeah, but they're not being social, you know. So
sure,
it's a weird time to live, because then you and I are finding ourselves in this countercurrent, and it's like, at least my experience, like with our community, it's like rich, it's beautiful. There's like flourishing friendships among families who are having children and working meaningful jobs and like have desires and goals for their life. And it almost feels like we live a part of like the so-called like great generation who are like building America. But it's deeper than that, because our basis is not like shared political ideals. It's the faith, right? So it's like, I don't know, that's at least been my experience, like seeing St. Mary's kind of like almost resurrect in a sense with these families and stuff. And in the midst of that culture I just described, it's pretty beautiful. But
for sure.
Yeah,
I guess also another point to that is, we create all these time-saving devices like you were saying, and we might be spending more time managing it, but also, I mean, it is giving us more time to do things, but what are we choosing to do with that time?
Yeah,
I mean, it's absolutely wasteful. You know, where we haven't, it's like, oh, we'll have more time to do more productive things. No, you're choosing to do less productive things with that time now. You know, everything's being managed for you. You're not doing it yourself, you know? Yeah, I think that just plays into everything you said.
Well, there's something valuable about like hard work, like actual energy exerting hard work, whether it's mental effort or physical effort, and physical effort's probably better. But no, that's interesting. Didn't you say, and maybe this was off camera, were you technically atheist at one point? Was that accurate, or more agnostic? I mean, you definitely were agnostic, it sounds like, or just ambivalent, but were you atheist ever?
I think that I would say I was atheist. I didn't think there was anything. I didn't think there was, you know, I didn't really get down the whole rabbit hole of like, well, science clearly proves that there's no God. I think it was just like, look around, like, why is bleak. Right? It feels like there shouldn't be a God, because if there was, that'd be pretty awful that this is the way the world looks with a God. So, I guess I think back, like, I was hugging my girlfriend and someone would be like, save room for Jesus, and I would just say, well, if you can show him to me, I will. Dang. You know, like just blatantly, just like, oh yeah, well, prove it. Right. You know. So I think that was where I was at. So I would think that would be more of an atheist level of thought. Yeah. Like I wasn't really considering the possibility of religion or considering like anything other than it's just all by chance. It's all just happened randomly.
Now, along the path to your conversion, did that, like, did you have to like rationalize that and figure out, like, so I mean, obviously at some point you're like, like there has to be a meaning, but even just philosophically, right? Like there's atheists who argue like, well, there doesn't have to be meaning. We're just have evolved to expect it for survival mechanisms or whatever. Did you wrestle with any of those concepts?
I don't know that I did. I feel like it's only been like once I became Catholic that I was starting to, like, I started thinking, well, I guess the church has got to have an answer for everything, so I better start looking into it. And then at that point I had already like fully trusted, like, okay, the church has to, like, there's truth in everything. And so at that point it was like I can trust the church for everything that I'm going to believe about creation, about why we are the way we are now, our, you know, just the human being. So I think I never really wrestled with any of those thoughts before becoming Catholic. It was only after that I was starting to be like, okay, well, you know, if I'm going to be challenged on my faith in these regards, then I need to understand it and know it. And at that point I trusted the church that it was going to be right. So yeah.
I think most people are probably like that, right? Like where there's almost like this innate expectation of meaning. And if they would only sit with that long enough to really think about it and go, well, what is it? Where does it come from? And then if they had maybe encounters with people who were well formed or with sources or whatever it is, maybe that would lead them there. Like I know that I have like sort of a bias because I was coming of age, at least intellectually, in a time when like new atheism was really strong. And so I was deathly afraid, like, oh no, that's going to be the influence on most young people. It's like this belligerent, militant atheism. But it doesn't, it kind of seems like it just whoosh, fizzled out. And I mean, were you even aware of like that type of stuff, like Hitchens and Dawkins? And
No, not at all. Not really. I just, yeah, it's interesting. No, I didn't really take much time to think about it or really give it any thought. No.
Yeah. It's interesting. I would imagine that like maybe now it's more, there's some sort of like spiritualism or new ageism among young people. Maybe not even like spoken about in any cohesive ways or propagated in cohesive ways, but
sure,
it just seems like people are kind of returning to some sort of like crudely neo-pagan type of thing, I guess. But
yeah, I think there definitely seems like there's a resurgence of pagan practice.
Yeah,
I can see where you're coming from with that.
Yeah. Okay, so after you convert, you come into the church, you receive all your sacraments. What's Gerhardt like after that? Like, what's been the biggest change? What have you seen happen in your life? Obviously, you've been married. Maybe that's part of what you want to talk about, but maybe just personally at first, like, what are the effects of conversion in your life?
Yeah, I think the first things that I'm starting to notice is that the way that I need to be living is radically different from my family. It's, like I'm going to be going to church on Sunday and no one else is coming with me. This is something that I'm doing by myself. And I'm, praying before I eat any meal. I mean, I think like the first thing that I see change is like, oh, I'm like living a radically different lifestyle from everyone around me, from all of my family and all the friends that I have at the time. And I think the really biggest change was I feel like I just stopped hanging out with people in high school. Like there was, I still wanted to have friends, and so I was trying to spend time with people, but with that weird COVID schedule, it was like the people that I may have hung out with were going to school on the days that I wasn't. And so
it's so wild.
It was weird. It was like half the class was every other day, and the other one was on the those
because that would
have
like made a difference in the spread.
Right. So it was like there's less number of kids to be exposed. Now we're gonna get that
COVID banner at the bottom of this video.
Right. So I just start realizing I need to find like good friends. I need to find people that are going to be positive influences on me, because who we are is influenced greatly by the people we're around, and so I need to find positive influences on myself. And I think I start just kind of falling away from a lot of my friends and hanging out with the Hartmans more. And I think at first my family was a little just like, why are you doing this? What is the point of this? Like, why are you changing all of this stuff? And at first it was really burdensome to them, because it's like, okay, well, I'm not going to be doing that anymore, doing this, or, like Lent rolls around and it's like, well, I'm not going to be eating meals with you because I'm doing this and that sacrifice or something. So I think it was, at first it felt like a burden on my family. And I think that was, they didn't like that, but they've started to, I guess, more accept that idea that I'm just living differently. One of the most interesting discoveries I made after my conversion was talking with my father. He was like, our entire family was Catholic, right? And I was like, no, I didn't know that at all.
Yeah, nobody told me that.
Yeah, nobody told me. So, yeah, he was like, well, no, yeah, all of my, my parents, my grandparents, they were all Catholic. And, so it was like, yeah, he had fallen away from the faith, and I had never had any of that influence. We didn't have much contact with our family, really. So, and the ones that we did, all of them they just weren't Catholic anymore, and they didn't even think about it. Like that wasn't even something that came to mind. So,
right.
That was kind of interesting, realizing like all my family was Catholic, and then it was like it skipped a generation, and then right here I am, like I'm joining, I'm joining the Catholic faith, and now I'm like going back to almost like where my family was.
That's cool to find that there's like that heritage there and that legacy, and you're picking it back up almost. That's
Yeah.
Nice.
So yeah, that was a kind of a beautiful discovery. It was almost like are my family members in heaven praying for my conversion, and
yeah,
and it's like they're
like finally somebody, yeah,
right, exactly. So that was just an interesting discovery to realize, and I think it felt like it was a while after I started to convert that my dad told me that, like I was deep into it. It was like, now you're choosing to tell me this, like you didn't tell me back before. It was
That's cool.
Yeah,
oh, that's really cool.
So I had to kind of separate myself from a lot of the culture that I was around, mainly because I think I'm pretty easily influenced by that, and so I think I just needed to cut a lot out. And yeah, it kind of feels like all a blur from there to now, just like that slow development of faith. Hard to recall, I guess, too many instances. I never felt like I was really heavily challenged in my faith in terms of like peers really attacking me for it, or my family. It was kind of just like, well, whatever, I guess you're going to do this. I definitely received some backlash, but it was never enough to be like, I'm going to disown you or exile you, like you're not, you're not family anymore. So I think they quickly kind of adjusted and were like, okay, this is just who you are now, that you're just different. And that's, and so at this point I'm starting to hang out with the Hartmans a lot, and I meet Anna. She's the older sister who's coming back from break from college. I'm at this point just finishing up high school, and I'm starting to like see where I want to go. I am realizing I want to do a job that's going to be really meaningful and impactful on society, and so I've decided to go into the EMS world, firefighting and EMS. And so I graduate 6 months early from high school and start my EMT program to get certified as an EMT, and then that's only a 6-month course, so I'm a certified EMT by the time I technically graduate high school. I have my high school graduation, my technical college graduation, and I've started dating Anna. We realized that we were very similar, had a lot of, I guess, similar habits and tendencies. We're pretty straightforward, serious, and I think we latched on to just being like, I can communicate with you really well because we have that same communication style. And so, we start dating, and I'm, realizing that like the whole point of dating is to get married. So I need to really be like critically discerning this. And I realized that if I was going to be a firefighter, I don't think I'd be able to be the kind of father and husband that I would want to be, being away for a few days, not getting to be at church every Sunday, being that I feel like I would be a lacking role model in a way. And so I still want to pursue the medical field, but I just don't know how I'm going to do it. And at this point, I've decided there's no way I'm going to college. There's just no way. I'm not going to do that. I was a slacker in high school. I didn't really take school seriously. So I see college as just being no fun, just being awful. And I don't think I'm good.
Indoctrination. Yeah. Unless you go to Benedictine.
Right.
He's wearing a Benedictine shirt.
Benedictine,
so,
right. So, which is where Anna went. She,
oh, great. Yeah.
She got a degree in theology and English. So a dual major.
Hey, that's my same dual major.
Yeah.
Not from Benedictine, but that's cool. Didn't know that.
Yeah.
Nice.
So I'm starting to realize I need to figure something else out, and I finally settle on the trades. And at this point, Anna and I are engaged. We're going to get married. And, we kind of went through this period of time where it was like, we need to decide where we're going to live and what we're going to do for work. And for me, it was like, I really need to figure this out, because if I'm going to support a family, like this needs to be ironed out pretty quickly here. So at first, the reason she got a dual major in English and theology was wanting to pursue a career in writing and publishing. So she's, searching for a job opportunity, going to Ascension Presents and all these different places. And she finally gets a call back from Dynamic Catholic. And so they're in Cincinnati, and we're like, well, I mean, if you really want to do this, then let's just go and we'll just try it out. And so we're engaged. We're a few months out from our wedding, and we moved to Cincinnati. You know, she gets housing through work. They have like this thing set up with Northern Kentucky University where they can stay in the dorm rooms. I get like this Airbnb for a month over like 30 minutes away in this little town outside of Cincinnati, you know, kind of like the opposite side almost. Oh, no. And that was a great experience, I think, in terms of just like trying to figure out like scheduling and planning, like how are we going to make this work in terms of like seeing each other and being far away, and just kind of like almost in a way like learning to live together, because we're trying to eat most of our meals together. We're trying to spend a lot of time together. And she's starting to realize that if she wants to be a mother, if she wants to be at home, that's not going to be compatible with working a job like this. And so at first it felt like a really hard decision, because it was like, well, she didn't really want to live in Montrose. She wanted to kind of branch out and let's do it on our own. We're both Montrose natives, so
this is the classic Montrose problem.
Yeah,
the young people want to leave. They want to stay here.
Right.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I mean, Montrose is great. Both of our families are there. We've got great job opportunities. I think like there's a great number of things. I think that would be the place to be. Like I've got ends, I think, at the hospital, and you know, she wholeheartedly wanted to pursue this. And so I said, okay, well, let's go do it. In the back of my mind, I was like, I think she's going to realize that she doesn't want to do this, but I wanted to give her that space to make that decision on her own and decide like where she wanted to be. I don't think it was anything that I could have told her, you know, if I said, okay, well, no, like we need to stay in Montrose. And I think she'd always have that thought that, well, what would it have been like had we gone? And so having that experience, I think that was really what made us realize, okay, we need to go back to Montrose. This is where we're meant to be. And so, you know, through many tears and tough conversations, we finally make that decision. And I'm like, okay, well, I need to figure out housing and a job. I'd been trying to do that in Cincinnati, and everything was falling through. Couldn't get anything. Like I couldn't find a job. We couldn't find a house. Like we had been to so many rental places, and it was just like nothing was working. And in 2 phone calls, I had a job and we had a house, and it was like, God is telling us where we need to be right now. There's no way this isn't. So I felt like it was pretty clear, like, okay, 2 phone calls and we're set up to come back to Montrose.
That's wild.
It's going to be good. So we come back to Montrose, and I'm working as a plumber, and I absolutely hated it. I was like, man, this, like, at first, you know, I made that phone call to the plumbing company and was like, I'd worked for them straight out of high school. I'd done an internship with them just to explore it. Like, okay, well, if I don't want to be a firefighter, I guess it might be nice to see if something else is interesting. So I had started working with them. And I called him and was like, I want to come back. I want to like put some time and commitment into the company. I'd love to like be here for a long time and start, you know, working my way up. And I think this is the way I need to go. And, you know, he's like, well, that's all the things I want to hear. Of course, I'll give you a job. And so we come back, and, you know, I think it was like day 2. I was on, it was like a plumbing and heating company. So I'd been hired on the heating side, you know, doing duct work. A tenor is what they call you. And on day 2, I was like, this is awful. I kind of got thrust into a difficult work situation where I was left pretty much alone. And like, it was really isolating because I was left alone on this job site out in the middle of nowhere. Like, I mean, there was other people on the job site, but it was like, okay, I'll come check on you at 2, and like, I want you to have all this done.
Just starting, huh?
Right. And it was like, well, maybe I gave off this impression that I could do this, you know,
like, I don't know what I'm doing.
Was I being too confident? Like, did I tell them like, oh yeah, I got this, you know? So And he's like, okay, you got to string up all this duct. And it was like, you know, it wasn't too much, 40-foot long area. And I had like 4 runs to do. So it ends up being a good bit. But I have to assemble all the duct. I got to insulate it and then hang it all by myself. And I was like, this is not okay. Like, what am I supposed to do?
Were you just like Googling it and like...
No, I was like, I know, like, this isn't hard work. Like, I could do all of this, but the issue comes into play where it's like, it's difficult to hang a duct by yourself, like hang these long stretches, you know. It's like I've got like 20 feet here and I've got to strap it up to the ceiling and move on and keep going. And it was just like an absolutely absurd amount of work. And I was it just like crushed me. I was like, I can't do this. Like, this is I can't do it. And I think I just kind of got in my head like, this is what it's going to be like the whole time. Like,
this is life now.
This is what it is.
Oh man.
And I came home, and I've never cried after a day of work, but I came home and I just started bawling, and Anna was like, this is not right.
Yeah,
like, this is not okay. No, so I continue working there, but I get switched over to the plumbing side, which was much more enjoyable.
See, that's funny. Like, from the outside, you would almost be like, I would never want to be on that side of it, but that was more enjoyable. Huh?
Right. It was more enjoyable. I enjoyed the people I was working with, and that was a really good experience in building my faith. I had a coworker there, who I started getting to work with more often, and I'm so happy I did, because he's very intentional about exploring his faith, and he's also into like conspiracy theories and stuff. So
always fun. Yeah.
Or he would say they're not conspiracy theories; they're just conspiracy, because
give it 6 months and then
theory,
you'll find the evidence. It's true. Yeah.
So, and he's got a really, I think he doesn't quite know. I mean, he'll say like he just doesn't know what. The only thing he knows to be true for certain is that God is real and that Jesus is who he said he was, and the rest of it he's still trying to figure out. But I absolutely commend him for his level of research and his like just commitment to looking into everything. But he really likes the apocryphal texts, like like Enoch and all that. Like I don't know how much
that gets interesting.
Like I don't know a whole lot about him, but you know, being around him, I got to learn more about it and hear about it, and it was fun. Definitely an interesting conversation to have. But he definitely pushed me to I think explore the Catholic faith more, just at some of those more, I guess, in a way, it felt like it was pushing me deeper than I'd gone before. Like, I'd already felt like, oh man, I've really dived into this. Like, I should, I could answer his questions, but it felt like I was giving him almost just cookie cutter responses. And so, I mean, it really challenged me to be like, okay, well, I need to like intimately know this. And that was really good. So, though it might not have been the best experience, I think that was a good time having those conversations with him and getting to know what he thought about the faith and talking to him. I think through those conversations he started to see Catholicism in a different light as well. You know, talking to him about the Eucharist, and he's a really big Old Testament guy, Jewish tradition. He really likes that, and so being able to tie those in, he's like, okay, no, I need to give Catholicism more credit for a lot of these like synchronicities, and like there's something more to it.
Part of it, like that for me, that was huge. Like starting to see, because I was studying theology, and I was like wanting to be a pastor, and starting to just see those connections between Judaism and the Old Testament, you know, God's first covenant and the new covenant. Like it like the continuity makes sense. Like there should be continuity, and not in the way that like the Judaizers want, where it's like hasn't been fulfilled and like we're basically still Jewish, but like true and proper continuity is so important,
right? And
it's very hard to find that. Like I feel like just among like evangelicals, for instance, there's sort of this idea that like the Old Testament was very different, and then God was like, that doesn't work, and then it like changed, or like it's totally different, or there's no continuity at all. But that doesn't make sense of it, because then it's like, then why do we have the Old Covenant? Like, why do we have the Old Testament writings and all those important things that God set up, you know? And then for me, like I remember reading the book of Hebrews when it compares Moses' tabernacle to the shadow of the heavenly tabernacle. And I was like, oh, well, this dynamic is that there is a heavenly tabernacle, and that everything in the Old Covenant was a shadow or a copy or an image of that. So it can't be so different that it's unrecognizable to those people, because their whole thing was a shadow of the heavenly, you know? Yeah, that's huge. That's really big stuff. I think it's cool too, because like I think we live in a time when the average Catholic, just based on the resources that are out there from things like Ascension or whatever, can like get access to some of that stuff. Whereas like 100 years ago, it probably wasn't that way. You know, very few people probably knew about that. Except maybe seminarians and theologians and stuff, you know.
Sure.
And that was also during the phase when some of those people were like maybe a little too lenient, right? But it's interesting because I feel like even just talking to you and like Joey and just some of the people in our parish, like we're all at a higher theological knowledge level than like your average Catholic probably would have been 100 years ago.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and I think also a big part of that is the liturgy, you know, lex orandi, lex credendi, you know, how we pray is what we believe. I think that was probably another very critical thing for a lot of Catholics a long time ago, is that there was a, I don't know, I think the liturgy had more, and I guess I feel like depth. It had more depth. It gave you more insight into the faith through the very way that it is. I mean, everything is symbolic. Everything has meaning. Nothing in it is superfluous, and it's all very very important. And
the
everything
formative
has
power
meaning.
Is incredible.
Right.
Yeah. No,
So
that makes sense.
I think that also would be more of a critical thing for people, like recognizing the Mass as a sacrifice. Really, you know, so which carries straight over from Judaism. You know, it's made clear from the beginning, from Genesis with Cain and Abel, that like the proper worship is sacrifice. Right?
And God demands sacrifice.
Which really is completely lacking in a lot of Protestant services. You know, I mean, we have some liturgical ones, but really it seems like most of it's all just it's a concert, it's a conversation,
and like a political rally.
Really. So. And more so, I think you can see that like in the enemies of the church, like they know that sacrifice is the true form of worship. So who's attacking the faith and how are they doing so? I mean, in the like Satanists, the greatest mockery of Catholicism.
They're not mocking tent revivals and
no,
like
they're
a Baptist
not.
preacher.
Exactly right. I mean, they know it's true. It's almost like they have more faith in like some of the church than a lot of Catholics do today. It's like they know that the Eucharist is truly Jesus, body, blood, soul, and divinity.
70% of Catholics might not think it, but 100% of practicing Satanists do.
No, I mean, you think about that, and it's like, oh.
That's a little like, yeah. No, that's definitely interesting. I mean, there's a lot of things like that too, right? This is one thing I think about too, like coming from Protestantism and like a particularly like rah evangelicalism, like very American, like that was the flavor I came from. There's something so refreshing about having like a serious religion. And I mean that in like the fullest like sociological sense of the word. Like when we were doing the procession for the Feast of Corpus Christi yesterday, this is recorded the day after that. People watching, they're like, that wasn't yesterday. As we're walking and as you guys are processing and they have the canopy and Father's holding the monstrance and we're like walking into a like blatantly public sphere, I was like, there's something so obviously divine and spiritual about this, but there's also something so satisfyingly human of like us like saying, this is what we stand for, this is what we believe, we know everyone needs this. Like it's like that's a sign of deep seriousness that you would be even willing to do that.
Sure.
As opposed to just cultivate like, oh, we're going to speak about these ideas in our building that we've made comfortable so you come in. But there's no confrontation with the outside world. There's no embodiment of it in a corporate sense in that way, and there's no capacity to do that, right? Like what are we gonna parade with as evangelicals? Like maybe hold a Bible up and like walk around and like, okay, that'd be kind of cool maybe, but like to have the Eucharist, to believe that really is Jesus, and then to like walk onto Townsend and be like, hey everybody, you know, and then cars are slowing down, like it's so foreign to our world today. Like everyone yesterday was like, what is happening? Like, what are these people doing? You know, it probably looks like a scene from the Middle Ages, but that's deeply satisfying to me because it's, I mean, that's another part of Catholicism's fullness is it's anthropologically full as well, right? Like everything that we need as human beings is present in the church and in the sacraments and like particularly the liturgy, first and foremost.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, that was like a deep pivotal point for me, at least, was realizing that it's not merely about these intellectual ideas that we have. It's about the life of Christ being, like when we talk about like the tradition, that's what it is. That's the very life of Christ in its totality, passed down through the ages, and the various mechanisms that the church has to, propagate and protect it. So
sure. Yeah. That deposit of faith.
Yeah.
Apostolic succession.
Yeah.
All that. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the other things that really just like drove me to Catholicism. I just can't see how anyone else could claim to have like this descent from Christ. Like it's so clear and so obvious, and it's like, yeah, no, Christ is alive through that tradition, and he's alive through his apostles, and like we have the apostles of Christ, we have their successors, like we can claim that, and that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it was cool when I went to Rome, and it's I forget which church it is. Was it St. Paul outside the wall? Maybe it was that one, but they have the pictures of all the popes going back to Peter. Yeah. And I mean, it just spans all the way around the building. And then there's like a couple empty frames. I'm like, oh wow, they're already like ahead. They're like, yeah, we're just gonna hang like 4 or 5 at a time. So there's a couple empty ones that we're not having to do it all the time. But that's like fascinating to think, like especially in America, like it's such a young country. And we're so focused on the new. We're so focused on what I've done, what I've built. And this is an interesting point. That's a distinct difference between, like, I guess you could say Enlightenment liberalism, or even just like American culture, and not even like American progressivism, just America as a whole, whatever side of the political spectrum you're on, is there's such a focus on me and what I've built and like my innovation, my personal innovation. Like how can I change things, as opposed to apostolic succession is the opposite. It's I have a responsibility to hand on something that was given to me. So your responsibility as a bishop, your responsibility as the Pope, and even as just a lay Catholic, is not to leave your mark on it. It's to hand it on, right? It's to take the very life of Christ and put it forth. And, obviously doctrine develops, like things grow, but they never fundamentally change. And like we don't add our flavor to it or our style to it. Like this is the thing. And we have a responsibility to hand on the very source of life itself, unmutilated, unadulterated, to the next generation. And that's fundamentally humble, right? Whereas like the posture of our whole culture today is the opposite of that. It's fundamentally prideful. It's what can I do? What's my remix? What's my twist? How am I going to innovate? And what's funny is like everyone's doing that, so now no one's original, no one's innovating. It's all and no one's creating, actually. Like no one's authentically creating. Sure. Because you almost can't create. Well, technically we can't create like in a fundamental way, but we can participate in creation or participate in the in a way, especially like in having children, but even in terms of like the things we build, like we can participate with God in that. But like our culture wants to fundamentally create, and in doing so, like nothing new is created, and everyone looks the exact same, right? Which is like ironic. Yeah. That the people who are handing on what's been handed on are more creative and more alive and flourishing, because according to our cultural milieu, we'd be the most dead and boring and the least efficient and the least innovative. But it's like almost the opposite from what I see. So, sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess moving forward from there, I'm starting to realize that like I want to like pursue the medical field. Like why did I want to do that from the beginning? I wanted to help others. I wanted to show others that they have dignity. I think especially in like emergency medicine in the ER, a lot of times people just get reduced to just another body that we're trying to get through, and not everyone is able to receive that recognition of their importance and their dignity, and they're not being shown that they're loved. I mean, we also get, a lot of homeless people through there, a lot of people that are lonely, they call 911 because they don't have anyone in their life, and they're like
repeat customers almost, right?
Yeah, frequent flyers. Yeah. Right. It's like, oh, my chest hurts, and then 5 hours later, they call EMS again to come pick them up and bring them to the hospital. I mean, you know, it's just, they're desperate for attention. And I realized that I wanted to show them that they're loved by someone. And like,
it's beautiful.
And it can be very challenging sometimes too, to see Christ in every single individual that comes in. Cause it's like, really, you came to the ER because you have a cold, you know, and it's like, just leave. Like, why are you coming here? But like, for them, that they might be really scared. They might not be having, you know, this could be something that is, for them, is very difficult to go through. Maybe they have a family member who died of something that was very similar with the symptoms, you know? So,
well, you're probably encountering a lot of people who are the lowest of the low.
Oh yeah.
And like at the fringes, right? Like the people who have the least human contact, or maybe have a plethora of mental health issues as well. And you're seeing that like daily, whereas most of us have probably created a little cloistered off section of society where we don't have to deal with them that much.
Yeah, no, and that is it. I mean, you get a lot of people, they don't have insurance, and they know that they can almost like freeload on the system, you know, like I can go to the ER for anything and I'm going to be seen and I just don't have to pay the bill, you know? And so, yeah, you get to see a wide range of people, and that has been definitely influential in my like recognition of Christ in everyone, and developing like a true and deep love for my neighbor. You know, I don't think I could say before that I started working in the ER and like getting to interact with these people that I truly loved in a way, you know, like I'm like, oh man, I was so jaded. Like I didn't have, like, I probably would have seen one of these people before and been like, just move on, like don't look at them, ignore them. And now it's like, I want you to know I love you, and I want you to know that I'm trying to take care of you. And yeah, it's difficult, it's challenging, it's hard to, you know, sometimes you're like, oh my gosh, stop, like just what are you doing here, leave. Or it's like, stop being a baby, like you've got an ingrown toenail, like it's fine. But like so it really has helped me try and like and just develop compassion. And I couldn't imagine doing anything else. Just the fulfillment that I get from it, and being able to show people that love has just been so impactful on me, really. And it's also, I always make sure that something says, I wear my crucifix every day, and make sure that it's, you know, my scrubs are a V-neck, so it cuts down naturally where it's exposed. Nice. And so strategic move. Yeah, so it's like, oh man, it just happens, it just comes out. I'm wearing a V-neck. So but you know, it's always a great talking point, because some people, you know, I think I've had some really great conversations, and even in like the fast-paced setting of the ER, I can still stop and for a moment like talk to them, or they might ask me about it, and that's an opportunity to be like, well, that's why I'm here, is because I want to love my neighbor, and there's so much importance in building up the society around you, and trying to be a positive influence, and expose people to the love of God. So you know, I think they're oftentimes moved by that, and I hope I've made a few people think more about the life they're living, or about the faith. So that's really cool. I mean, it definitely sounds like you've discerned, I mean, obviously marital vocation, you're married and all of that, but even beyond that, like a personal vocation and apostolate in your work, right? Oh, which is endlessly fulfilling. That's huge, you know, because otherwise it can just be a box that you're checking, you know. Exactly. Yeah. No, and I attribute that to why I enjoy my job so much. Like, I get to go to work every day. Every day that I go to work, I want to be there. Like, I think about going to work on my days off. Like, I'm not one of those people that's like, oh, I'm really enjoying the weekend. I don't want to go back on Monday. Like dreading it. Like, you know, I wish the office would burn down so I didn't have to go. Yeah. Right. And I'm like, I'm like thinking on my days off, like, oh, I wish I could just pop in and just like, just see what's up. Yeah. You know, what am I missing? Right. Yeah. I absolutely love it. Like it is very fulfilling. I'm getting to help others, and more so like my coworkers who I get to see day in and day out. I've had some really wonderful conversations with them. And I think, you know, I feel like the EMS culture, just emergency medicine in general, whether it's out, firefighters or EMTs, or it's nurses or doctors in the ER. I think there's, it almost seems like it's a different culture. I think it's a little more.
It's kind of intense, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a more intense group of people, and
probably high stress.
Yeah, high stress, and I think a lot of people get burnt out easier, and I feel like I've just kind of noticed that a lot of people are really far left in a lot of ways, and so I think interacting with my coworkers, I'm very fundamentally different from a lot of them. There's a few that I can see, but I mean, it almost just, I guess, maybe not politically left, but I guess I would just say more like just very
socially progressive.
Yeah, just very socially progressive people. And even with like the like Harrison Butker's speech, like being in the ER people, I wear my Benedictine t-shirt sometimes to work. I can wear just a t-shirt, tuck it into my scrubs, and so I wear it occasionally. And recently I kind of didn't even like think about it, and then I like had my shirt on. I was about to go to work, and I was like, oh, people are gonna say something, like someone's gonna say something. And so yeah, I mean, I don't shy away from my faith at work when I'm talking to those people. Like,
it's good.
Like they might be talking about something that, like, just a plethora of topic that you could think about. And if they ask me, I'm like, well, you're definitely not going to agree with me. And this is just honestly what I believe. And I'm not trying to be offensive. It's just, this is who I am. And I tell them honestly if they want to know my opinion about something. So, yeah, definitely a lot of interesting interactions. Most of my coworkers are fallen away Catholics. They were raised Catholic. Yeah. And I think it's kind of been interesting for them to see me, and like they're like, oh, they'll ask me questions about the faith, and it's like they had never known some of those things. And it's been a lot of interesting conversations had in the ER with my coworkers especially. So
well, and they haven't bitten your head off for not being socially progressive. I feel like a lot of times people might be tempted to shy away from that, oh, I don't want to bring that up because they'll, cancel me or reject me or whatever. But I mean, it sounds like you've approached it respectfully, and that's probably a difference maker as well. But it's probably also shocking too, because like I feel like at least in today's atmosphere, it's one of those things that most people are on board with that stuff, and so like they can bring it up freely. And I mean, we even see this in our line of work. Like people will be freely talking about like transgenderism or homosexuality or even abortion, like it's just a given that everyone in the room is passively or even actively on that side. And then just like the slightest voice of opposition, and it's not that they're like disgusted, they're just like, this has been my experience at least, they're like almost like shocked, like, oh whoa, I didn't even think that anyone held that opinion anymore. What kind of reactions have you gotten?
Honestly, I feel like everyone's been really respectful about it.
That's good.
I mean, I'm very blunt. Like honestly, I don't beat around the bush and try and be like, well, you do your thing and I'm doing mine over here. Most of the time I'm like, yeah, no, I do not agree with homosexuality in the slightest. I don't agree with abortion. I think those are absolute degenerate practices. And
you say it with that same tone probably?
Yeah, no.
They're probably like, what do we do with this?
No, exactly. I mean, it's just kind of who I am. I'm more monotone. I'm straightforward. I don't really beat around the bush. And so I think a lot of times they just don't even know what, like you said, they just don't know what to do with it. They're almost just like, you're just so matter of fact. It's like, do you think I'm joking? Like I'm being monotone? Like I just have dry humor?
He's just trolling everybody.
Right? No, but yeah.
Well, and it has to be too that they know you. Like they know you're not this like reprehensible, hateful person. And you're, like when you're saying that, you're not going, I just hate gay people. Like, you're just speaking your opinion, but they see this person who's good at his job, who cares about his coworkers and his neighbors and his community. And I think that's a good testimony to people, right? Because like the picture that's painted of Catholics in culture at large is that, I mean, especially with something like the Harrison Butker speech, it's like a perfect example of like, it gets skewed to where it's like, yeah, they hate women, they hate gay people, they're so backwards and anti-intellectual, but then it's like to actually encounter someone that's, who knows what that's going to do for them long term, like, but that could be like the initial impression of going like, wait, that's not what I thought,
Sure. Yeah. And I think that that's kind of where the conversations usually end up, is they want to ask me something and I'm blunt with them. I'm just completely honest in what I believe.
I love it.
And the reason why I believe it. And most of the time I think it ends up making them think more about it. Like I can just see them like, oh, that's interesting. I've never thought about it like that, or I've never really considered that. And I would hope that, some of those conversations have been for the better, and it's made some people think, but it feels like it does. So
it sounds like they're still talking to you about those things,
right,
too. They haven't just drawn a line.
Yeah. And I think a big piece of that is I try and listen to them too. I mean, I can't just like be like, well, whatever you're saying, I don't even want to hear it, because I don't, I don't believe that. It's like, I have a coworker who is Catholic. She still goes to mass every single week, but she lives a homosexual lifestyle, and she recognizes that she shouldn't be receiving communion, and she doesn't. And
wow.
So it's, I mean, that was one of the interactions where I was like, I don't even know where to like start with this, but I genuinely want to understand like where you're coming from and what you think and what you believe, and like I want to have this conversation with you. And so, I mean, those times when it is slow in the ER, we can sit down and I can just say like, tell me like, why do you believe what you believe? And I had some really great conversations of like, and just listening. Like, I don't need to even say anything. I just like, I'm so like, just thank you for sharing that. I'm happy I got to talk to you. And, next time I can, I might share a little bit about what I believe. But it's like, I like being able to ask questions like, well, why do you believe that? Like, where what do you get the basis of that opinion from? And just making people like stop and realize like, okay, I need to, if I'm going to believe this, if I'm actually going to say this, then there has to be a reason for it. So it is really, really interesting.
Well, and it's, I mean, you highlight an important point too, that like the essence of evangelism in maybe not every context, but in many contexts and in many successful interactions is going to be relationship oriented.
Oh, certainly.
Like they have to trust you enough to open up and to share those things, and so you have to develop that trust. And even if, and maybe especially if you're going to be coming from a very different place than them, they have to really develop that trust. And so you have to prove yourself trustworthy over and over again, that hey, even if we disagree fundamentally on something very important, such as like, a central identifier to that person's lifestyle, like their sexuality, they have to trust that even if we disagree vehemently, that you're not going to use that as like a battering ram to make them feel belittled and stuff,
Right.
That's a fine line to walk, though, and I feel like most people have just given up on that, like in our culture at large.
Sure.
But it's really important to learn how to do that and reclaim that. So that's cool.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So right now, where I'm at is just, I love my job. I love where I'm at in my faith journey. I think even, I feel like everyone can look back, and even if it's like a year ago, they're like, oh man, I was doing so poorly. And you might feel like right now, oh, I'm doing really good. Like I feel just like I'm really pursuing my faith. It's like, even give it 6 months and you're going to be like, oh man, I suck. Like I am not a good Catholic. Like what am I doing? And I feel like that's kind of where I'm at right now, is just going through these stages of growth where I'm like, I feel like I'm doing really well, and then it's like, no, you're like at the lowest of the low, and then okay, I'm gonna, I need to change some things, and
that's the whole game, though, isn't it? I mean, like, the person who, like, I would fear the attitude in myself, and I've had this attitude, like, man, I'm a really good Catholic, because then usually you're like, well, right? That's you're probably
lukewarmness,
lukewarm or and prideful potentially,
right?
But yeah, I mean, you see that in all the great saints. There's this humility of like, I'm the greatest, St. Paul says, I am the chief among sinners. And yet we're like, dude, what? St. Paul, but yeah.
I think, and that's what really separates us from the saints, is just that like they recognize their sinful nature. And a lot of people, I'm sure, are like, oh yeah, I'm doing good. I'm just going to keep moving forward. I've got my routine, and I'm not going to go to hell. So I'm just going to keep going. It's like, well,
I don't have to change anything.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, well, no, that's exactly where stuff gets rocky, because it's like you don't know, like your faith isn't being worked out in fear and trembling anymore.
Right.
You know, it's like now you're just going through the motions. And I feel like pretty much like from the beginning, when I was like initially converting, it was like I had that initial like growth, like I need to learn about the faith, but it was like I didn't feel like spiritually I was growing very rapidly, and I didn't really have that recognition. I was like, there's some pretty big like sins, like I need to obviously start. I was deeply rooted in a lot of mortal sin, and I needed to get rid of that. And at that point, you know, a lot of the things that we do are a complete addiction at that point. It's like, I hate this and I don't want to do it, but my brain is telling me that I need it. And so we continue in those sins. And I mean, that was like the first battle, was getting rid of those mortal sins. And then I feel like I fizzled out pretty hard. It was like, okay, I'm not like mortally sinning on the regular. What do I do now? Like, I guess I'm just gonna go to church and, you know,
just chill, dude.
Just chill. It's like,
done.
Yeah, it's like, great, I'm Catholic. Perfect. And so, yeah, no, it's that's definitely where I think I went to Denver for a short period of time. I guess this is, now I'm backtracking quite a bit, but before, when I was engaged, and right before we were engaged, and the last few months of dating, I had moved to Denver, and I was like, that was where I had more access to people in the faith. So I could go to Bible studies, I could go to weekly adoration. There was just more events happening in this Catholic atmosphere, which surprisingly, you know, you think about, I feel like I would always look at Denver as like super progressive and very liberal, but it has like a really strong, flourishing Catholic community there. It was kind of shocking when I moved up there. I was like, oh, wow. Because I think every time I'd gone up there to visit my dad, who was living there at the time, I was kind of just, I felt like a very low information Catholic, just like, okay, let me go on to Google Maps. What's the nearest parish?
Results may vary.
Right. And so I go to this church, and I you know, I was like, yeah, we're all Catholics, so I'm just going to go to the closest one, just, you know, it's convenient. And it's one of those octagonal churches, the tabernacle, like half the churches has their back to the tabernacle, the altar's down in the center. And I didn't really think much of it. You know, I was just going, I was like, oh, great, I'm going to church, and, you know, at least, you know, it's like I'm going outside my norm. I'm like going to visit someone, and I'm making sure to stick to that routine. And it wasn't until like I ended up actually moving up there, I think I was at a much more developed point in my faith, where I was starting to like be like, okay, no, there's a very clear way that God desires to be worshipped, and this octagonal church is not it, you know?
Yes, it's something different for sure.
Yeah. So, that was a really great growth point for me, of like, oh my goodness, there's so much more here that I didn't even realize that, you know. And that was my first exposure to like the Latin Mass at Our Lady of Mount Carmel. And
is that FSSP?
That is, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they're FSSP.
Because they have FSSP, and then is there a diocesan Latin Mass out there still?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
I don't believe so. I think the only ones are Our Lady of Mount Carmel, and then they also have a convent there in Littleton, where they have the Latin Mass. And then out to the east, out near the plains, they have another parish, SSPX Church, St. Isidore's. So I think those are, and then I think there's an SSPX mission up in Fort Collins, potentially. So yeah, there's not too many, but I mean, where my dad was living at the time, it was only 20 minutes from Our Lady of Mount Carmel. So
yeah, that's not bad for like city driving.
Yeah, why not? Why not go over there? I mean, it wasn't far at all. He was in Highlands Ranch, and it was in Littleton, so it really is just like right next to each other. I got really lucky in that regard, where it was like I didn't have to drive like an hour, because I feel like I was at the point in my faith where if it was an hour to go like to the Latin Mass, I probably wouldn't go. You know, it definitely had to be closer to me. So
I think it shocks people when like younger converts like the Latin Mass. Like I've had this conversation with like some older Catholics, like, why do you guys like the Latin? But it is, I mean, there's that reverence there, you know, it's ad orientem, which is, I mean, I wouldn't even just say preferable. I would say like that's just how it should be.
It's the way it should be.
And even in the Roman Missal, still it kind of assumes that, you know, like it says when you turn to face the people, and that's kind of assuming that you weren't until that point, you know.
Sure.
But there's like a lot of like just a lack of general awareness of that stuff, you know. So much happened on the ground.
Yeah.
You know, in the 70s and stuff that was just like, at best, like kind of gross, and at worst, like blatantly cringe and reprehensible. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, we've talked about this. Well, you and I haven't, but like people in our parish have talked about this. There's just like, you know, so many assumptions about what should be happening, and but like not informed. Like even Sacrosanctum Concilium, like most people would read that and be like, whoa, that's not what I was taught, you know. But
right,
it's
yeah,
like the Gregorian chant having a part of place, and you know, all sorts of things like that. So I think it's encouraging though that most young people that are remaining are like starting to take that stuff very seriously and like want the liturgy to be beautiful, and not just like what you think is beautiful, but like properly and transcendently beautiful, you know.
Right. Yeah.
So much incense that you can't breathe. Like.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I want to be choking.
I love it. Yeah, exactly. Like.
Yeah. No, I think that's something that isn't really recognized, as there is an objective beauty. Yeah. Like we can say that they're between 2 points, even like in like music per se. Like there is a high end and a low end, and whatever is closer to what God would desire is going to be that high end, and it's objectively more beautiful. Like I would say Gregorian chant is on the upper end of that, you know, just not like no pipe organ, just the human voice, right? You know, that would be like the most desirable. And then you get down to like bongos and rain sticks, you know, like that is this is further from the apex, and so like it is objectively less desirable. I think you can apply that to just about anything we have in life, you know, even like just the music we listen to in our free time. Like if you're listening to metal music that has like satanic themes in it versus listening to, let's say, like country music that's got at least some semblance of like faith in it. Like one of those is clearly and objectively closer to the truth. It's closer to what is like is the fulfillment of what beauty is. So
well, it kind of goes back to lex orandi, lex credendi, right? And like all that stuff is formative, you know. This was a big turning point for me, even just personally, is that like, I mean, I used to watch and listen to all sorts of popular culture stuff, and I still will, but I have a very different attitude when I approach those things, and it's much less frequent, and that's not out of some like, oh, I can't, you know, it's not like this self-righteous attitude of like, I'm not going to engage with this stuff, but there is this awareness that like it impacts me and it forms me, and so if I'm going to, and that's a big change, is like the if, not the it's assumed everyone's watching this, therefore I will too, but like if I'm going to watch this show or listen to the new like Kendrick Lamar album, I love Kendrick, but like I need to be in the right mindset where I can maybe engage with it but not have it like form me, right? And that's very really difficult and taken for granted, I think, a lot of times. So, but then the same thing to say like with anything, especially when it comes to like spiritual stuff, it's the same way. It's like, if it's, I mean, that's gonna be forming you at the innermost part of your heart, you know, that should be taken with great importance and great seriousness.
I definitely see, like, I think naturally I was attracted to like the spiritual after I converted, and so even like when it came to video games, when it came to the music I was listening to, I always was just naturally drawn to stuff that had more spiritual undertones, even if it wasn't good spiritual undertones. And so that was like something that I've even like now I feel like I'm going through this very heavy muck out phase of like, okay, is this good for me? If not, then just throw it into the trash. And so at this point I feel like I've cut out so much stuff, and I'm like, I need to cut out even more. But I think like video games, especially ones like, I know Brooks has talked to you about this one, but the video game Blasphemous, like even the name, it's like, okay, it's like saying it's blasphemous, but like it was like playing off of Spanish Catholic culture, and so it like has a lot of this imagery where it's like, this is really like, and like you said about like relics, like it's super metal, like it's almost like showing like how metal our faith is, like just how hardcore it is. And it was like, in a way, for me at first, it was like, this is really cool. It's like expressing Catholic culture, and it almost, I wouldn't say it helped like strengthen my faith, but it was almost like, this is like, Catholicism is really cool, you know. And then, you know, you start like looking at it and you're like, well, this is a play off of Our Lady of Sorrows, and this is like, is this a healthy depiction of Our Lady, or is this like purely blasphemous? Like, is this actually bad for us? And it's like, yeah, no, it is. I need to stop. I shouldn't be playing that game. Like, it's like, what is this like, how is this informing what I think about like sacred art and sacred images like Our Lady? Like, is it degrading my view of her? And also music. Like, I for a long time really liked rap music, and especially like Suicide Boys. Okay. I mean, you know, they grew up in Louisiana. They were influenced by Catholic culture in Louisiana, and so I think a lot of their music has those Catholic innuendos into it, and it was like, I really like that almost dark, macabre feel of their music, but it also has like Catholic references in it. And so it was like, I really like this, but it's like, okay, well, they're on the wrong side of this, you know. It's not good.
Yeah. So. And it's weird how that impacts you, right? Like, I started to realize this, my example's gonna be way less cool than yours, but I started to realize this with like John Mayer's music. No Catholic references. Well, maybe like you could maybe argue some songs are like maybe quasi-religious in their references, but like just the overall tone of it is so depressing and nihilistic and stuff. Like, you know, some of his stuff is that way. Yeah. Which might sound odd to say, it's like it's a pop artist, like it's bubbly, but like it really isn't. It's like very brooding and depressive, and for me that like impacts me a lot, and I'm very sensitive to that, right? So as much as I could be like, wow, the technicality of his music is good and I like listening to that, you know, I've seen him live, all that stuff, same thing, I enjoy it for these reasons or whatever. Yeah, I either have to like not at all listen to it, or like in very select doses when I know I'm in a stable place where it's not going to affect me and I can analyze it, like, I guess you could say, I don't want to say objectively, but with some fortuitousness in my own spirit and in my own approach, where I'm not going to be just giving myself over to it. But that's what's tough, and there's so many instances of that now with like pop culture. Like, for a while it seems as though like the narrative was, oh, it's just a show, it's just a movie, and we're like almost naive to how A, powerful and formative those things are, but then B, like maybe how intentionally formative some of it is too, right? Like, it's entirely just almost propaganda, some of it at this point. Maybe a lot of it is, but and then, or like, you know, like I think about, you know, certain artists, whether it's in like performances or in songs or in album art, like making a mockery of faithful things, or like portraying themselves as like a demon or like the devil, or, you know, and it's like, it's just like funny. Is it, you know,
it's like, no, it's
maybe
not. You know.
It's, no. And maybe they're not joking. Like, maybe, I don't know. That's been my big there's thing. My tinfoil hat. But like, how many times do we have to have that where it's like, oh, they're all just kidding, and then it's like, but at the same time, like, the moral order is degrading. All of that is getting amplified in terms of how severe it is, right? And the things that they're celebrating, I mean, just like blatantly celebrating degeneracy and debauchery and things like that. Yeah, no, I think going back to that idea we were talking about, how it seems like in today's culture and today's youth, there's almost this resurgence of neo-paganism. I see that heavily in a lot of movies and art and music, and I think that's been the biggest thing recently that's been like driving me to be like, well, should I really listen to that Big Bad Voodoo Daddy jazz song? Like, okay, it's jazz music, but like, look at the name of the band, like, look at their album cover, like, it's like so entrenched in the occult. It's like, I mean, you said you're putting on your tinfoil hat, but like, I think it's almost blatantly obvious they're throwing it right in our face. It's like, you look at all these album covers or you listen to the lyrics and you're like, you are clearly like thrusting into your music occult practice, Freemasonic practice, like all these things that I think if you would just stop for a minute and look at it, you're like, I don't want to consume this. I mean, like, curses are real. Like, this like demonic power is truly there. And
for us to almost be like, oh, it doesn't exist. Like I don't believe in any of that. It doesn't affect me. It's like, no, there's like spiritual warfare is so critical. And I think those are like the easy ways that we can be influenced, you know, like, let's say, just take, for example, like one of those Suicide Boys songs. Like I listen to it, and then now a lyric is stuck in my head. And then I think like, okay, but let me slow down and think, what is that lyric I'm saying? And it's like, oh my goodness, this is like I'm saying something that's completely contrary to my faith now. And that's what's pervading my thought. Like, why would I ever want to consume that and then let that become the subject of my thought throughout the day? Like, that's why now I feel like I almost exclusively listen to like Gregorian chant. Like I have my little bouts of like, oh, I really want to go listen to like some Primus or something, you know,
Primus,
just something just like absolutely silly, like off the wall. And it's like, I have a hard time like seeing like one of those bands as like being like truly like demonic or something, or like having a cult influence. Like, it's like, okay, there's a silly song about a cat named Tommy, like, and it's got a really tasty bass lick. Like,
yeah, there you go.
I really, you know, I might enjoy that, and it's not like becoming everything that I'm thinking about, and I'm not saying something contrary to my faith now in my head like repeatedly. It's like it's almost like it's very intentionally catchy, you know. They're getting you to have this mantra that is just like drawing you away from God. So yeah.
Well, and just like I narratively, the way that American culture approaches celebrities, that is our pagan pantheon. Does that, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
There might not be, I mean, I guess I could say, if I was just to read it narratively and maybe not assert that this is actually what's happening, because I don't think I would say that, but narratively there is almost a sacrifice, right? Like, how crazy have people gone over like Taylor Swift tickets in terms of the monetary cost?
Sure.
What, I mean, the length of the concert, the intensity of it, and like that might be like, oh, Drew, that's a silly parallel, but like the ticket price might be the sacrifice, and then there is sort of like almost like worshipfulness offered in terms of like, yeah, buying a ton of merchandise. You know, we don't have icons on our walls. It's Taylor Swift posters, and I'm not trying to allege that like little girls are worshiping Taylor Swift, because they're not directly, maybe,
sure.
But something akin to that level of honor is like, you could see at the very least you could say they're venerating them.
Yeah, at the very least, like, it's an unhealthy attachment.
Yeah,
you know, it's something that is drawing you away from God. Like any,
right.
I think, you know, St. John of the Cross, St. Teresa of Avila, they talk about this heavily. Like, what is drawing you away from God? Like, what are your attachments? Like these creatures. Like it is the, you know, whether or not that's the celebrity that you know, you got to get that next album, you got to go see him in concert every year, like whatever it is. Well, then
there's the pomp and circumstance of it all.
Sure.
You know. Yeah,
no, it is. I mean, it's you start to look at it, and it's easy to see how people can make that their main focus, and in a way that becomes their religious experience. You know, like this is now like that's what's inspiring them, and it's oftentimes with really bad things, you know. Right. It's influencing their life, and they all have the
same political agenda, which is also interesting.
Yeah,
you guys can infer from that what you want, but
sure.
like there's like a uniformity at the top of it, which is, it is interesting. Well, man, we started with conversion and got to Illuminati, so I mean that's a pretty we kind of ran the full gamut. Yeah, well, it's exciting to hear your story, and you know, thanks for being willing to share it. I'm encouraged by it. You know, I think we're seeing, again, like I said earlier, like not like a lot of people, but the people that we're seeing convert, it's like this. It's like there's this intensity, there's this intentionality, and yeah, I mean it's cool. You know, for everyone listening, you know, you've probably got the sense that like we have this little community forming in Montrose, which I think is beautiful, and I think hopefully that starts to happen everywhere. You know, in the Catholic creator world, a lot of it's happening in Steubenville, and you know, there's little pockets of things like that. But like we kind of have our own little version of it. It feels like, and it's really cool to see, because almost everyone in it has a similar story of like, I don't want to say like meaninglessness, but yeah, something either superficial or meaningless or not enough, and then this like deepening, whether they grew up Catholic and then started to take it seriously, or they converted like you and I. And it's cool because we have this like whole posse of families and people in our little group at our parish that are doing that. You know, it's a cool thing to see. But thanks for coming on and sharing your story. I think people will be encouraged by it. And it's cool. It's cool. I'm excited to see whatever. I mean, it's just going to be cool to see how everyone in our little group plays out, like,
for sure.
And then someday, I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm revealing too much, when you start your Catholic, your Catholic family practice, or what was it? You had some vision of something like that, right?
Yeah, I definitely have a vision of moving forward in the medical field, and how am I going to not only support my own family, but then more so, like, can I get to a point where I'm more greatly, like I guess getting Catholicism really rooted into my practice in medicine. So a few ideas floating out there. We'll see where it takes me, but
when you start something like that up, we'll have to get you back on to talk about that. That'd be cool. Or if you become a beekeeper, we'll do a behind the scenes on that. Cool. Well, thanks for coming on, man. And
thank you.
Thanks everyone for watching. If you like this episode, share it with someone who would benefit, someone who maybe is similar to Gerhardt and could benefit from listening to his journey. I also wanted to just mention, so in the next couple of months, I'll be going to the Eucharistic Congress, so make sure that you follow along for that. We've got a lot of cool stuff planned, some cool interviews. Nothing I can announce yet, but some cool stuff in the pipeline. And then the other thing I wanted to say is, if you're looking for some good Catholic content, a big part of our conversation today was, like, you find good sources, you find things that you can read, things that you can research, and you want to make sure it's a good Catholic, like authentically Catholic perspective. I did just become an affiliate for Tan Books.
Oh, amazing.
So, if you want authentically Catholic content rooted in the, in the tradition of the church, they have lots of good book offerings, and you can use Drew15 for 15% off. So
gonna have to go get some books right now. I'll go home and get some.
It's funny because I'm not gonna make any actual money from this affiliate program, because I'm gonna spend all of it on books.
Right. Yeah.
But
reinvest.
Exactly. Yeah. Get some good content out of it. So.
Exactly.
Anyways, everyone, thanks for watching Drew the Catholic, and we will see you next time.